Okay, well, welcome to the North Carolina Porch edition of Guerrilla Discipleship. I get to be your host again. My name's Kevin Baker. This is my best friend, Tim Carson.
Howdy.
And we're kind of going back to some roots here. We're going to talk about discipleship from a long time ago. Actually, we're going to talk about our experience of being discipled, and we just happen to have been discipled by the same, or at least in many ways, by the same couple, especially a guy named George Anderson and his wife Carol. So we're going to spend just some time reminiscing about that, going back to the beginning, and then we're going to talk a little bit about our life today, and we'll see how that goes. So, Tim, how did you get to Mount Oak? We were both a part of a church called Mount Oak in Mitchellville, Maryland. How did you get to Mount Oak?
I actually got to Mount Oak through my wife, then my girlfriend.
Cindy. Wait a minute, your wife, then your girlfriend?
Well, no, actually that's backwards. She was my girlfriend, now my wife.
Okay,
Cindy and I met in college. I'm a Pittsburgh boy. She was a Maryland girl. And so when we first started dating, I came and that was her church. She talked very, very highly of it. Then her dad was diagnosed with cancer while we were dating. And he actually passed away the day we graduated from college, which sort of sealed the deal for us of where we were going to live after we got married.
Yeah. And
we decided to move to the Maryland area, and her church became my church, and George became my pastor. So that's how I got to Mount Oak.
And the way I got to Mount Oak is I was engaged to a girl. We were not going to church, and I said, let's try this church. We were just looking for a church to get married in. Wasn't Michelle, by the way. I was engaged before Michelle. I probably ought to scratch that whole thing. But but anyway, so we found that, the way I like to say it is I found the church, or I kept the church and lost the girl. Man, God just got a hold of me, and I remember how I got in beyond just being a churchgoer and into a little bit more connected with George Anderson, who was the pastor. Was I had been going to the church for just a couple of weeks, and I was in college, and he said, hey, he came up to me, introduced himself, and he said, hey, I'm going to be putting a college group of guys together, Bible study, I think he called it, and he said, would you like to be a part? And I said, yes. Eventually, that group, we became a part of that together.
Right.
And so let's just talk. I feel like I've been discipled by George. I'm assuming you would say the same thing.
I would say that.
So let's just talk about what that experience was like, because I don't remember George ever saying, hey guys, let me disciple you. He was really kind of just leading our group, and it was a wild group. I mean, we were a wild group of guys.
Yeah.
What I remember most about that was he encouraged us to be just real about the struggles we were having in life, what life was giving us. And he would always say, Jesus has answers to that. And so it was a practical application kind of a thing. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I feel like I should give context here.
All right.
Because I first of all grew up Catholic. And growing up Roman Catholic, I'm part of an Irish Catholic family. Growing up Catholic, it was very, the idea of coming to Jesus or having a personal relationship with Jesus really was kind of a foreign thing to me. I came to Christ through Young Life, and as a 15-year-old, I was in track, and our local Young Life leader came to our high school and began to start a Young Life club. He was planting a club in our high school, and came to start hanging out at track practice, and started inviting a bunch of us to come to Young Life Club. And so we started to go. And I heard him talk. I remember actually, and this is 40-some years ago, wow. I still remember his first talk at Young Life Club. He talked about your relationship with God and compared it to your relationship with your parents. And I had just never heard the gospel that way before.
Wow.
I then I came to Christ a couple of weeks later. Had prayed the deep spiritual prayer in my bed right on a Sunday night. God, if you want me, I want to be yours.
Wow.
And
that was all you said?
That was it.
Did he tell you to say that, or you just felt like that was the right thing?
Yeah. That's just what I prayed.
Your heart was.
Yeah. God, if you want me, I want to be yours. I distinctly remember waking up the next morning and being disappointed because everything wasn't different. I can tell you now.
What were you expecting? Do you have a sense?
Well, see, my mom and I had this ritual, and this, of her waking me up, me going back to sleep, and her standing at the bottom of the steps and screaming, and it drove me crazy.
That would drive you crazy.
And that's what happened the next morning. And I thought, I thought all this would be
You were hoping God was going to heal that.
I was hoping, I was thinking everything would change. Everything did change. I just didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
A little later in my faith, there was a lot of brokenness in my family. And I ended up getting involved in a group at the University of Pittsburgh. I didn't go there, but a bunch of my friends went there and started in this group called Lamb Fellowship.
So this is pre-Mount Oak.
This is pre-Mount Oak.
We have Young Life, then we have Lamb Fellowship.
Right. And Lamb, what the problem was with Lamb is they took too much authority in people's lives.
Okay.
So they have a bunch of college kids, and the leaders would come and say, listen, we prayed and we feel like God's saying that you, Tim, should marry that girl over there, whether you knew her, were dating, or anything.
Wow.
And if you said, I don't think that's what I'm supposed to do, then you were in rebellion. And so they were taking too much authority.
Yeah.
And the people who loved me and who also had some of their kids in Lamb came and said, you got to get out. Well, I had kind of given my heart to them. It had a lot of brokenness in it. My heart had, and I was looking for that.
Okay.
And Lamb provided that, but it was wrong.
Right.
And so when I got to Mount Oak, I was on what I would call I was finishing a 2-year sabbatical from being a Christian. I just didn't want anything to do with it. I'd gotten burned. I was out. I was just like, whatever. I was going to Mount Oak primarily because of Cindy.
Because you wanted to please your girlfriend.
I was trying to please my fiance at that
fiance.
time.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I had told her, listen, I still believe, but I just don't want anything to do with any of it. And so that was the spiritual sort of place that I came to, or that I came to Mount Oak to. I was kind of done. I was burned.
So how did you get, I don't know that I know. I mean, we met really in that Bible study.
Yeah, we did.
So how did you get to the Bible study? You said, Kevin's there, I want to be there?
That was, actually, if I remember, I was warned that Kevin was there.
Probably.
No, I got there because George invited me.
Okay, so kind of the same thing as me.
Same thing.
Okay.
What kind of finally turned me sort of back to the Lord, and whether they meant to or not, George and Carol, or George came to me and asked Cindy and I if we would do the youth and the church. And so we were running the youth program.
Okay.
And here I was, like, saying, I don't want much to do with this.
Yeah.
And what actually sort of flipped me in that was a bunch of our kids who we loved went off to college and really struggled in their faith. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to stand here and give them something, it ought to be real.
Wow.
And that was the thing that sort of drew me back in. But and George came. I remember we had this crazy conversation in my driveway about youth ministry, and I actually said to him, what you're saying is offensive. And he said, well, I mean it to be offensive. You're not doing, you're not giving them what they need. And
well, that was George.
George.
In fact, I want to make the point. Part of what I experienced in that Bible study was, this wasn't just a sweet old guy talking to us about Bible stories. And that was my experience too. George loved us, but or at least he thought he did. I mean, he spent time with us, but he wasn't afraid he wasn't afraid to deal with real things and to be, confrontive. I remember, we have some great stories. We won't go into them now, but we have great stories of sitting in the room with a bunch of guys and George just calling it like it was. And at sometimes wanting to almost crawl under the table kind of thing, like, oh my gosh, where is this going to go? But so what? Here's what I remember about that time. Before I even knew, what was happening, George was making he was helping the Bible come alive for me.
Yes.
What I recall was the Bible wasn't some distant document or some. It was like, hey guys, this stuff that we read in the Scripture is possibly to be true today. That was the sense I had. It's like, hey, these things are real, and this is real for us, and we can experience what these people experienced. And he was constantly challenging us, but I think also there was an atmosphere where we were encouraged to be real, to be honest.
Yeah, he always put it into application.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's true.
And the real strength of George and Carol in their ministry was relational, and they just did that really well.
Yeah,
and they did that with us really well. In other words, that was sort of the culture.
Yeah, that's true.
And so he was taking the Scripture and applying it, but you had the relationship with him that it just all sort of worked together. So you're right. He wasn't just saying, here's this story, here's this information, go figure it out.
But he was also asking us to be a band of brothers. I remember him talking about that a lot. Like, we need to go through life together. So,
right.
All of those things are going on. And what happened, we've talked about this before. Both of us have, we had some difficult, let's see, I would say it this way, see if you agree. We had dads who had not finished working through their pain, which created pain for us as families and in our relationship.
Yeah.
We'll say it that way. And before I realized it, George became a spiritual dad to me. I felt like I was being nurtured almost in a fatherly way by George. And he wasn't afraid to confront, but he wasn't afraid to nurture. He was training, teaching. He was just kind of doing life. Do you remember? One of the things I always thought was interesting. He would bake for us on Saturdays. Did you ever go over to his house? Like, he would make pancakes or something.
Yeah.
Food was kind of a part of that. And he's like, come to my house and we'll have pancakes. We'll have breakfast my own dad had never really done that.
Sitting around the table with him and him making stuff
and talking about life and talking about work and him asking you questions and
how you doing and
it actually got to be in my life and I think maybe for you as well. And I'm skipping a lot, and we can go back on some of this, but it got to be in my life that I would ask myself this question: what would George do?
Mm-hmm.
What would George say? Because I realized, in fact, it scared me because I realized how much influence he had in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, is this a bad thing? Is it bad that I'm letting this man have this much influence in my life? And I really tried to wrestle that through.
The father thing is an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
Like you said, we both came up with dad issues.
Yeah.
I found and then to top that for me, my father-in-law died before he was my father-in-law.
Yeah.
And I was really sort of looking for a dad figure. And man, George really did fill that figure. And I always considered that a grace of God. It's something where if you just look at it on one side, you can say, okay, you come up with all this mess and you're looking at this mess and going, oh, that's not good. And yet God used that mess in that way to connect me with George.
Yeah.
And to allow I think in some ways, some of the significant discipleship stuff to take place. So to me, it's one more way that God uses even the messy parts of us, and uses it for good.
And it wasn't just George. I mean, I was highly influenced by you in that group. I was influenced by other guys. I remember, I was coming out of I had been on a prodigal journey when I got back to Mount Oak and introduced to George. So I had not been a church guy, a church kid. Mm-hmm. And so I remember going into that study thinking, I'm not saying a whole lot. I want to see what's going on. And guys were talking about struggles, real struggles that, 18, 19-year-old guys have. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're talking about it. Didn't faze George at all. He just talked about, well, Jesus can help us with that. So I learned from the passion of and the questions and seeking of others in the group. There was something weird about. I remember this. I wonder if you do. So eventually, George's son, who's a little bit younger than us, just like a year younger or so, was in the group with us, and I remember there was a time when we had this tough conversation. I think we were. I don't remember where we were, but George was kind of frustrated because we were just being doofy guys. Right. We weren't paying attention. We weren't, we were just messing around. And he kind of was trying to confront us to say, let's stay on task or something. And his son was Kurt got on him a little bit about that and was like, you can't, I don't know. Do you remember any of that?
I do remember that.
I just remember that being an odd thing. First of all, that what it modeled for me was an interesting relationship between son and father that I didn't have. Right. And it modeled what I think I always appreciated about Kurt was the kind of guy. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. Kurt always seemed to feel comfortable in his own skin,
and still does.
Yeah. So. And I saw this guy, a son, comfortable in his own skin, comfortable dealing with his dad, and not in a dishonoring way. Right. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is the whole atmosphere, and I became a discipleship-centered atmosphere. And, I think that's what Jesus did, right, with his guys. They lived in community, and they had fights among themselves, who's going to be the greatest and whatever. And Jesus just spoke into the day-to-day stuff that he saw. Right. And George would take us away at least, once a year we'd go on a retreat. We would, and those were crazy fun. That's when actually, and maybe we can speak a little about that.
Let me go back before we get there. Let me say one more thing.
Yeah.
If I were going to say, how did George disciple me?
That would be good. Let's talk about that.
I would say that what George did is he just poured himself into me. Yeah. He just included me in his life.
Yes, that's good.
In very real ways. Yeah. He included me in his struggles. I remember he and I had, and I think the three of us, in fact, had some very real, and I'm a guy in my 20s at that time. He was in his middle to late 40s. Yeah. And we had these incredible conversations about real stuff, about desire and lust and temptation and all of these things that were just so real. Yeah. But he discipled me by opening his life to me and then just pouring into me.
Boy, thank you for saying that, because I felt that same way. He would always include us. Yeah. One-on-one sometimes as a group. He's like, hey, I know these guys. I want you to see this ministry. Let's all go down. And we would go down to see things. I remember as things went on, he would say, Kevin, I've got this thing I need to do. Would you do it with me? Right. There was always that invitation, come and do it with me, come and be with me, come and he seemed to always value our opinion. I mean, he really wanted to know what we thought, as if it was like, it wasn't like this big adult guy that had everything figured out. It was like, what do you guys think? And so I felt valued by him. Yeah. So you're right. It was life on life. He poured himself into us in a very relational way.
And the truth is, George did a better job of handing off ministry in his church to the next generation than anyone I've ever seen before or since.
I think that's true.
He poured into all of us guys, and he raised up a whole bunch of leaders that way. And then he gave them, the people who were in charge of that church when we were there willingly gave up positions of leadership to other people.
And we didn't know what we were doing.
No, of course not. But he just threw us in.
Yeah. By the way, whoever said we should do it in these chairs, these are the most uncomfortable chairs trying to stay focused here. Anyway, hey, we've got a lot more to talk about. What I want to do is kind of draw this down to a close for this week, but we're going to continue to talk. And so what I would like is for you to come back and join us next week, because we're going to talk a little bit more about how we were discipled, how that played out. And I want to get in also into what happened with us and how our relationship, because we've now known each other 30-some years, 36 or so years. And so thanks for joining us on Guerrilla Discipleship, and we're going to see you next time.